all your school rugby, all in one place. This is Next Gen 15.
Hello, welcome back to the Next Gen 15 podcast. It's episode 2 of season 3. I'm Angus Savage, and again, I'm joined by Will Roberts, as I will be all the time here on the podcast. How are you doing, Will?
I'm good, thanks, Angus. It's a couple pods in a couple of days. We've started strong, haven't we? I imagine we'll keep this up throughout, well, eternity, won't we?
Exactly. We're showing how the sausage is made here, because I'm actually
Exactly.
going away on holiday tomorrow, so we're trying to pack as much in as we can early on. So if we sound like we're a little short on team sheets, etc., it's because no one in their right mind would have published them yet. But it's certainly going to be a good one to look ahead to. Before we get into it, though, make sure that you give us a shout. We want to hear what you guys want us to talk about. So get in touch on social media, which is all on @NextGen15, @NextGenXV, and also the NextGen15 Clubhouse at NextGen15 Clubhouse across platforms. Will, how's the Clubhouse started off?
It started off well. By the time people listen to this, we would have got our first sort of pieces of exclusive content out, which will be really exciting. And we're just trying to spark conversation about what has been a pretty packed sort of couple of weeks for age grade and young rugby players. So lots of talking to be had, I'm sure, on there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time for it, isn't it? Because obviously, the bulk of what we're going to be talking about today, what we talked about last time, is the Academy League, but obviously we've got the under-20s as well, and then as we sort of look forward through the under-26 nations, we've got the England under-18 stuff as well. It's a big old time if you're a promising young rugby player.
It is indeed, and as you say, it all sort of kicked off this weekend in the Academy League, and I mean we were one game short, weren't we? But the other sort of 4 matches didn't really disappoint.
No, they really didn't. I mean, we might as well get into it because,
Let's go for it.
first of all, clearly you and I know nothing, because we predicted the big upset on the opening day, Friday night. Up in Yorkshire, we would go, do you know what, fancy Yorkshire to get an early one. And Leicester Tigers showed us that Leicester Tigers are what Leicester Tigers are.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's never sort of the easiest to go first on a Friday night because, as you said, I think it was a couple of years ago where we had a few sort of upsets. I think it was Leicester that were toppled in the opening round on the first game on the Friday night. And it can really kind of rock your season, especially because it's such a shortened campaign. But look, they went up to Yorkshire, did the job. 45 points seems relatively comfortable. Again, sort of because of the shortened format. It's not just how you win. It's not just about winning, but how you win as well, and the amount of points you can get off it, points difference, bonus points, all that sort of stuff. So, Leicester will be pleased. Obviously, Yorkshire come away with nothing there. They'll want to get stuff out of their home fixtures because traveling for them is going to be really difficult. They've got a long sort of a lot of distance to cover across a fair amount of games. So they'd have wanted to start well, but obviously have come up short in this game.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess maybe I don't know too much about it. I'd perhaps like to get some of the Yorkshire coaches actually on one time because their job relative to everyone else's job is so completely different. You know, every other academy coach is sort of working within a system that goes all the way up to the Gallagher Premiership and beyond. Whereas the Yorkshire Academy coaches, it's a very different environment in that they're just looking after the under-18s. Obviously, they've got contact with the other academies where there's a player who's attracting the interest of a Sale Sharks or a Newcastle Falcons or whoever going forward. But so there'll be communication there, but it's a really different role. And I do wonder, does that make things more difficult? Is it harder to sort of bring in really testing training sessions where you might be looking at some game footage of what the senior side are doing and trying to bring some of those things through? I don't know. It'd be really interesting to find out what it's like, what the challenges are in that environment, because the players are definitely, it's hardly likely that a place as big as Yorkshire with as many good schools as Yorkshire is lacking for players. So it'd be quite interesting to sort of see how it all works back there. But Tigers, that's a good start for them. And do you know what? I was sort of looking ahead to next week's fixtures as well, and Tigers have got Newcastle Falcons. They're playing at Leicester. Newcastle, who are coming in for their first games, it might be a little bit cold. Tigers, and I think there's a conversation around this with Saracens as well, who've got the back-to-back away games, where you kind of look at both of those sides and you go, if you come out of this 2 from 2, you're in a really strong position. Sarries away twice. They will get into their game, but a sizable win, and then they go down to Gloucester this weekend coming. You win those 2 away games. Suddenly, you're looking at a bit of a home run, and you're going to be feeling confident at home. Similar with Leicester, they've got that away win under the belt. Now they host Newcastle, a game they're probably going to be favourites in. It starts to, this is a short season. It's only 5 games.
Yeah.
It starts to look pretty comfortable after only 2 rounds.
Absolutely, and especially in that northern bracket where you've got sort of a rest week or a bye week. So obviously there are, I think there's a couple breaks already set in for every side, just some sort of rest weeks. But having that bye week can sort of mean that you've got to continue to strike probably quite cold. You're not going to be able to build much momentum. So when you have opportunities to build momentum, like Leicester do here, they're going to have to take it. I mean, just looking back at this Yorkshire side, I think there's some really exciting names in there, and I want, obviously we can't be across everything. We wouldn't have seen the ins and outs of this game, and 100% will be things that we can't see beyond sort of team sheets and score lines. They paint only so much of a picture, but obviously Kaylan Umanga at 10 for Yorkshire. He's obviously it's a storied name within the game. I know he's sort of had a lot of hype coming into this Yorkshire rugby setup. Bishop Burton College boy, so it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, he was up against that sort of England pairing of James Townsend, Oscar Talbot, halfback for Leicester. So that could be, I think, having a crucial sort of level-headed fly half at under 18 level. We've always said is massive, and he could certainly play a part.
Yeah, huge. I mean, you look historically, the teams have done well. They've all got a fly half that's a cracking talent, and whether they end up as a fly half as time goes on or not, or whether they move elsewhere, is almost by the by. There's always a good fly half in the very best teams, and certainly Yorkshire have got that opportunity, haven't they? And as we say, Leicester as well. Saturday, I'll tell you what, we're talking of good fly halves. James Lineker at Bath is definitely one of those, already a professional rugby player, despite being at school. So, give him his props.
He feels as though he's been a professional rugby player since about 14, sort of the way that he plays. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So, do you know what? We were live streaming his game for Kingswood down at Clifton College, and Kingswood had a tough old time because Clifton are unbelievable. But Lineker the difference between him and other players around the country, whatever the score was, 40 to not very much, he was still so competitive. It was unbelievable. Just like really trying to take the game to Clifton when it's done and dusted. It's freezing cold on a Thursday night in late September. He could have been well forgiven for just going, do you know what? I don't need this. And he absolutely didn't. Still throwing everything at it, still being brave enough to take the ball to the line, still sort of looking at getting his boot on the ball and trying to create 50-22 opportunities. He's some player. And his team had some outing at the weekend, 33-0 down at Exeter Chiefs. We were saying that's Truro College is a long way to go, a tough place to go. It'll be a difficult one, but Bath, well, if they're anything like last year's side, nothing phases them.
I think they'll actually be sort of slightly better than the side that obviously won the under 18s league last year, which is obviously some feat. So they seem to be the ones to watch, and they've backed that up with a statement score. As you say, look, winning in Exeter is difficult. Nilling Exeter in Exeter, like that's sort of different level, really, and. It comes down to they've got some real sort of key individuals that would have played really well and certainly given a good showing, but sort of the bottom line is that they work really well as a coherent sort of group.
Yeah.
And I think that's come to fruition here.
Because actually they were missing some top players as well. You know,
Yeah.
they didn't have Oscar Thomas at hooker. They didn't have Evan Gallagher either. So that's two sort of top end hookers,
Mm.
not starting nor on the bench. I mean, they're blessed in that department. They didn't have Ellis James, the Millfield scrum half. Some astonishing players out, and yet still the team sheet doesn't look weakened because there's just so much depth. I mean, they really must be rubbing their hands at this new catchment area down there.
Yeah,
It
I
must be
think it
amazing.
is that they have certainly been blessed with that catchment group, and look, it's not necessarily about, as we said in the previous pod, not necessarily about the individuals, but how you use them and how things can come across in a team. And look, you look at someone like Isaac Mears, who's been given this opportunity because Ellis James was unavailable. It's now his shirt to lose. He's obviously he done really well there, and that's got to be the exciting competition that Bath now have. The same will go for Fred Cartwright and Finn Tweedy, who obviously the two sort of hookers that were there for Bath down in Truro. They're now going to be fighting for those shirts, and the competition can only be sort of a positive, really.
And it's actually it makes me look ahead to sort of when contracts start getting doled out, because the fact that the league is now so truncated, you know, we've gone from 14 teams down to 11,
Mm.
and one of those 11 has to, yeah, at the end of the season, their players spread about wherever, because they've not got a Premiership club at the top. So there's gonna be teams more so than ever before, I suspect, that are giving players contracts who play in the same position. You could see, for instance, a Bath giving out two hookers a contract, or whoever else giving out, you know, two tight heads or whatever it might be. Where previously that was relatively unusual, unless you really thought that you had, at the very least, you know, a first team player and a sellable asset coming through. You're probably going to see it more and more often now, because the concentration of talent is so much more concentrated. It's going to be interesting to see. I think we'll see a few of those.
Yeah, 100%. And I think Bath also have the benefit, obviously, with a really tight knit sort of relationship with the university as well. I mean, we've had multiple conversations off pod about that Uni of Bath team that continue to sort of turn out as practically sort of Bath under 23s.
When you see some of the guys that are on the bench for that team,
Yeah.
you go, he's got England caps.
Yeah. So like that is a massive pull for a side like Bath. So then they therefore can warrant to spread around, and it kind of makes sense as to why they've potentially signed boys early, because they've potentially got more spaces to fill than other sides that can only just contract players and have them in sort of junior academies, senior academies. They maybe can have conversations with them and say, look, if you go to Bath University, we'll help you out here and there. We'll help you with your accommodation. We'll help you with the tuition fees, whatever. We don't obviously know the ins and outs of those deals, but it allows them to keep tabs on them for an extra 3-4 years. That's when, like, they obviously got a sort of embarrassment of riches in the front row. That's a key position in which you'd like to see players when they're 22, 23, rather than sort of examining them at 18, 19.
They also happen to have the only 19-year-old Premiership hooker in the country. But
Yeah.
you know, when do you ever see that? You know, front rowers traditionally it's been a really awkward position to be in the academy, and because you can't really get given games when you're 18, 19, 20. You've got to wait until you're a little bit older, because you've physically got to develop that much, unless your name happens to be Kepu Tuipulotu.
But I mean, the question is there? Would he have appeared on the bench? And maybe is an exception. Would he have appeared on the bench this weekend if it wasn't for his performances for Bath Uni this year?
Yeah, very possibly not. I mean, it's historically been rare, hasn't it, for young guys to get rugby playing opportunities in front of their coaches. You know, now with Buck Super Rugby, and particularly the likes of Bath, as you say, Bath and Exeter as well, who really use the system as much as they possibly can, where these guys actually get a proper game, and you actually get to see them and assess and go, yeah, do you know what, he's ready? Because as much as someone getting stuck in training is interesting, it's not the same thing.
No.
You know, if you're I haven't played Premiership rugby, but I would imagine if I'm a first team player and we've got the academy boys running a bit of defence against us, I'm probably thinking in the back of my head, unless I'm a real elite player, this is a bit, I can take it easy here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the academy boys are probably throwing everything at it because this is their chance to prove themselves. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. It was cool actually seeing Kepu come off the bench though. Got his line out right as well. That was the bit.
Exactly.
That was the bit I wanted to see. Got turned over in a tackle at one point, but that it almost doesn't matter that because he'll be absolutely fine there. His carrying's never going to be a problem. But he got his line out and it was under pressure as well because it was a drive line. Did they score off it? I think they might have done.
I think so. I mean, it was always the topic of conversation, wasn't it, when he was coming through? Because we knew that he would become a professional rugby player. That was nailed on. But I know Harrow always experimented with his positioning, as did London Irish, as did England in places of where would he play. Kind of your second coming of Alfie Barbary. We had this conversation, obviously, about him before starting out as a hooker, then to a six. Now, obviously, seems to be very firm, sort of in the back row. But I think we were quite surprised in places that Bath were insistent that he would be a hooker and seem to have been training him fully as a hooker. And look, he's getting his arrows right. I know, Angus, you've always been the Messiah saying sort of hookers don't need to throw, and
honestly, I've been telling Razzie Erasmus how it's done for years.
But it's not stopping Kepu, it's not stopping Bath, and yeah, he did quite well coming off the bench.
For anyone that doesn't know, I'm an absolute proponent of the fact that it makes no sense for hookers to throw into lineouts. Here's a collective group of people for whom that skill is not a natural skill. They have to learn it. And there are umpteen players on a field whose talent sort of lie precisely in the department of throwing a ball accurately, and we get them as far away from the thing as possible. Makes no sense at all, other than it's easier for training to have the forwards all together and the backs in a different place. I find it baffling, but I'm swimming against the tide pretty big time here.
Yeah, I think so.
As I say that, at least Razzie Erasmus has clearly been listening.
Exactly, and he's the person. He must be tuning in. So hello, Razzie. It's good to have you with us.
You're welcome on any time, mate. You're welcome on.
Exactly. I'm sure we can continue to lecture him about the way to set up a rugby team. What about the rest of these Saturday games, because they came thick and fast?
Well, you certainly were correct about Saracens, and I was very much wrong. I went for a tight game that Bristol just edged. You went for a Saracens victory, and Saracens pretty dominant. Hell of a start from them. Yeah,
they were. I think they sort of had from what I heard, they had an under-17 game before, which was pretty tight. I think Bristol actually won that game. But the under-18s, of course, where it sort of matters this year, sort of pulled away in the second half. I don't think the scoreline's completely reflective of the whole performance. I know Bristol sort of were hanging in there, but I think Saracens continued to keep them at sort of at least a 14-point deficit throughout the whole sort of game, which was really interesting. Again, I think Bristol are almost the anti of Bath in that they must feel really hard done by with this catchment area, because they have, well, a couple sort of elite schools to pick upon in what is actually quite a gluttony of sort of top sort of schools in and around the West Country. They only have a fraction of that in comparison to the other clubs.
You only need to really look at their team sheet and you see how sort of oddly made up it is. I mean, obviously the Clifton College are excellent and really close links with Bristol. They get a lot of players from there. And SGS College, who used to be Filton College, being their ace college. So they get loads of players from there. But actually, when you look through the team sheet, they have sort of bits and pieces from Millfield, from Hartbury College as well. Just sort of guys just kind of filling gaps. Actually, they had 3 or 4 lads from Taunton School, which was really cool to see. But they're pulling from a lot of places where they're not actually schools within their catchment. You know, Hartbury College is a Gloucester place, but Bristol always get kind of a couple of lads from there. Millfield a Bath place, but they've got a guy or two coming in from Millfield. So it's a tricky setup from a catchment point of view for them. I mean, again, it'd be interesting to dig in a little bit on maybe how the catchments are pulled together. I mean, I think a lot of it is about probably population density and density of schools in your area. And I suppose if you look at Bristol, there are a lot of schools in that Bristol area. It's just that they're not necessarily producing loads and loads of players that are of that elite level. That's maybe a little bit trickier. But then again, I mean, you look at Clifton College and they're running out a first team and a second team that are, both would be competitive in this league.
Yeah.
So they're hardly short, but it is definitely different. And Pat Lam has definitely mentioned on occasions in public that he's not necessarily overly enamoured with the way it's all set up. Mind you, it doesn't seem to be affecting them too much at the top end at the moment, does it?
No, exactly. But I mean, let's take nothing away from Saracens because that seemed a spirited performance. I think I kind of mentioned it in the previous podcast, but they will seem to be dark horses of this Academy League. I think Bath in that southern bracket will certainly be the team to beat. And obviously it will only be sort of one of them that will head to the final. But look, I think it could be very interesting. I think Bath is Saracen final fixture. I might have that wrong. No, it got Saracens Harlequins. So and then Bath Saracens is round 4. That's at Bath.
Well, that's a bit of a finish, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, all of these games are pretty big, but Saracens against Bath, followed by Saracens Harlequins, which at any age group is feisty.
Yeah.
That's a good way. Well, I'll tell you what, they'll be well prepared for finals day, won't they? Whatever position they end up in, they're coming off the back of 2 hot fixtures there. Well, speaking of Harlequins, game of the day, really.
Yeah.
Game of the weekend. Late score to beat Gloucester at Grasshoppers in the shadows of the Sky Sports studios.
Yeah.
That sounds like a cracking game. Makes it almost difficult to read where both these sides are at. But clearly a spirited Quinn side, but probably two sides that have played some decent stuff as well to hold each other to that sort of score.
Yeah, it was. I mean, first of all, good of Quinn's. They, as they usually do, sort of live stream the game, which is obviously brilliant for us, and definitely should be encouraged more across this Academy League because the level of rugby. I mean, obviously we can only look at numbers and figures for the rest of these games, but this one, if the others were of higher quality, then we would have a great highlight reel to show about. But this Harlequin side won well. They won well, which is quite an achievement. It will sort of hopefully put them in the right sort of direction. They've got to go down to Exeter next week. And Exeter will be reeling off that performance against Bath. They'll be really wanting to fight back and prove their worth, and Harlequins just need to kind of use this momentum right, because yes, they were sort of close to coming short, but a spirited performance, added the extras in the end, and got the 5-point win.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost we need to look at next week to get a true read on where everyone lies, I suppose. I mean, as you say, Quinn's going down to Exeter is going to be interesting because we'll get a real sense of where they both are after that. Were Exeter just unfortunate to be on the back end of a very, very good Bath side? Where do Quinns sit compared to that Exeter side? It'll all come out. It'll all come out next weekend. Cool, actually, that next weekend all the games are on Saturday as well, so it's going to be a bit of a fiesta.
Super Saturday, yeah,
exactly. And actually, no kickoff clashes as well. We're sort of staggered kickoff times, so that's going to be pretty decent. We should note actually that one game got lost this weekend. Sale Sharks against Saints. The snow in the northwest. I mean, it nearly cancelled Liverpool versus Manchester United. So I think we can probably say it was probably pretty grim up there. So we can forgive Sale Sharks for having to call that one off, I think. I think Manchester Airport was closed as well, so
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we can say it was definitely pretty ropey up that way.
But that'll be so difficult for both sides because obviously like these teams really sort of ramp themselves up towards that first round. Last game of the weekend, they must have been umming and ahhing across the weekend. I mean, I think if that game had been scheduled for the Saturday, it would have gone ahead,
Yeah,
most likely, because the snow obviously fell on Saturday night. So they had to wait the whole weekend with sort of fingers crossed, probably open their curtains on Sunday morning, and you're sort of feeling a bit sort of beaten by the weather. And now I think Sale have a bye week next week.
yeah.
So
So it's a really tricky sort of period this for them,
well
isn't it? They're going to be so cold in round three.
they won't play until Sunday the 2nd of February.
Yeah,
They've basically got a month now to wait until their next game, and that is at home to Newcastle. So like it must be so frustrating for them. Obviously, Northampton can bounce back next weekend. They play Yorkshire at home. So they'll be able to put in a performance. But psychologically for Sale, it could really stifle their season. And at no fault of their own, of course.
yeah. Excuse me. I mean, we saw it. I think it was a couple of years back. I think it was. I think Ollie Davis was in his lower sixth year, so he was under 17 for Sale, and I think they came across a similar thing. I think where there was a game they had to push back or got postponed, and it just I think they did quite well in it, but it just meant that their season became really truncated,
Yeah.
and I think they dropped a game. They were probably the best side in the league, but they ended up in the third place playoff.
Yeah, and
And it was
they played Gloucester, didn't they? And they sort of,
yeah,
I think they absolutely tore them apart on finals day. And sort of, I think Ollie Davis got a hat trick. Tom Hanson was in that game as well. Those two were sort of at half back, and Bradshaw as well. Like they had some
yeah,
alongside with like, you could list basically the whole Sale pack as well that would have put sort of Gloucester to the sword. But like I remember that game was at the Stone X, and it was pretty tricky. And these sort of people were scratching their heads, going, "How have Sale ended up in this position? They look like arguably the best team in the league, and yet sort of not fighting in the final in what is typically known as sort of the slightly weaker sort of
yeah,
bracket, that northern bracket.
yeah.
But the fact that they couldn't sort of put it down, that sort of truncated season really stifled them. So yeah, it could be sort of deja vu this time round.
Be an interesting one for us to talk about actually in a future pod is maybe if we get some runners and riders from both pools perhaps historically and just looking at why the North Pool versus the South Pool the South has tended to be the stronger is reflected in the Ace League as well, where the southern teams tend to have the run over the northern teams, and we only need to look at this season where I think in every playoff game the South team won.
Yeah.
Maybe there was one that wasn't, but I'm pretty sure they were all South victories. It'd be an interesting one to dig into because I mean again there's a bit like we were saying about Yorkshire earlier. There's players around, there's top schools around. Perhaps the concentration isn't as high, but then talent comes together, and so they're playing with each other more often. I don't know. It'd be interesting for us to dig in on one day, but at the risk of getting ourselves wildly distracted, I'll row back from there
Yeah.
for another time. Round two, as we were saying, all five games taking place on Saturday. We've got Bath, Bristol, the West Country derby. At any level, that's always a cracker. Exeter hosting Quins, as we said. Gloucester hosting Saracens. Leicester, as we mentioned, at home against Newcastle Falcons, and Northampton Saints making their bow after the cancellation, hosting Yorkshire Academy. Which one of those stands out for you as the sort of the big game to watch?
Oh, that's very tough because I think they all have sort of different stories to them. I think sort of I'm really interested to see how both Harlequins and Gloucester react to that game.
Yeah,
Both for kind of different reasons. I think Exeter Quins will be really tight. Because yeah, Exeter have something to prove. they will not want to become sort of whipping boys. I don't think they will, because this Bath team's a sort of exception to the rule. Harlequins obviously sort of produced a bit of a great escape against Gloucester, but that was at home. They've got to travel early kickoff down in Exeter. It might take them sort of 10, 15 minutes to get off the bus, and that's when Exeter could strike. So I'd probably say that game. But then also, I'm really intrigued to see how Northampton Saints get on, because we're yet to see them, and I think they're obviously usually known for producing top quality talent over the last couple of years. You'd argue that this team that they've got at the moment, this year group, isn't potentially as strong as the last couple. But obviously those have been ridiculously strong. So
Yeah.
it's not sort of a negative for Saints fans to dwell on. But against Yorkshire, it could be an interesting battle again. Yorkshire want to start proving people wrong quite soon. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued by a lot. I'm actually really intrigued to see Newcastle Falcons in action, because if you look back at the last probably 2, 3, 4 years of under 18s and under 20s international squads, Newcastle contribute an awful lot of players. They always seem to have a good number, and by no means does every club always have players in those squads. It's not as if it's a token gesture. Newcastle really do contribute really heavily. You know, getting into sort of half a dozen up to kind of 10 players in some of those squads. You know, we'll see what the numbers look like this year when we start getting into the international season proper. But it always makes me quite intrigued to see Newcastle, because obviously if you look at what the Premiership, the Gallagher Premiership team is doing, they're going to rely really heavily on their academy, because they're running a tight budget. They're aware of the fact that certainly in the phase they're in at the moment as a club, it's about bringing young guys through, and probably then accepting the fact that as they get to a point where they need a high wage, they're going to go elsewhere. So they need a production line to come through. So probably more so for them than anyone else, this league is massive, because they've got to get half a dozen academy contracts out of this almost no matter what. So I'm really intrigued to see how they go. They've, as I say, they've historically, or certainly recently historically, done a really good job of getting those players through, and of getting them, interesting. Jonathan Pendlebury at under 18 level, and Mark Mapletov at under 20s level. So I'm intrigued to see how they go. Obviously, Saints the other side making their bow. That's going to be a pretty interesting one. My eye is drawn though to Gloucester Saracens, largely because obviously I sort of mentioned before, Saracens the only team that are starting with back-to-back away games. And so if a second big performance on the road really sets them up nicely, but Gloucester are going to be reeling after losing in, last play of the game, they're going to want to make a big impact. At home, they're a tough side to play against, and they're another one of those teams that's got a lot of cohesion, some really good players in there, obviously that Hartbury thread, so lots of players that play together all the way through. I think that one could be really interesting, but as you say, I mean, there are no bad games there, are there? There's a storyline in each of them, that's for sure.
I think the one asterisk about Gloucester at home is that it's at Warwick School, which is
quite a long way from Gloucester.
I don't think many sort of Gloucester folk will call Warwick home. So that could be an even playing field for both sides. And I wonder whether they might play on that 4G surface at Warwick, which could then lend further to obviously both sides now play on 4G, but Saracens sides are famed for obviously doing well on plastic surfaces, so that could certainly be interesting.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one they'll probably be able to make quite a late call on that as well, because they can just weather dependent. They can go either on the main first team pitch or on that 4G. So there's options at Warwick. It's a pretty decent spot, is Warwick School, but not the closest to Gloucester. But again, that's the way the new boundaries have done for things. Warwick historically closely aligned to Worcester, but now very much in the Gloucester heartlands. So no, it's going to be exciting. Actually, it's worth us briefly touching as well. We won't get into it too much. We will, as the season goes on, we'll do more and more school stuff, because seven season is rapidly approaching. But the school season does start again this week. We've got some fixtures on Wednesday and some fixtures on Saturday, but obviously slightly compromised by the fact that these academy fixtures are going on as well, and there are also under 17 academy fixtures going on in most cases as well. So teams are missing players, but nice to have the school game back as well, and giving those guys another run out after what's it been, 3-4 week break.
I actually really enjoy this sort of couple of months of school action, because as you say, it kind of completely flips everything on its head, because the best teams have their best players taken from them, and the teams that haven't been performing as well suddenly sort of on par with these top schools. So you kind of bring out a bit of a level playing field, and gives other players a chance and opportunity, because as we know, I think the English schoolboy game runs so deep now that there are players playing for twos and threes that a couple years ago would have been challenging in academy games. I think that's just how sort of deep some of these schoolboy sides go. So it'll be fascinating to see. I think especially a lot of sides will also have one eye on the 10/7s calendar as well. So that might affect selection, because the last thing you want is to have one of your top sort of 10/7 specialists sort of injured in a exhibition or league game. Like that's sort of not what you want. So that could play a part in things. Obviously it takes out all the one-term schools as well, because they'll be focusing on other sorts. So it kind of becomes a bit of a wild west, the schoolboy scene, coming into January.
It opens it up, doesn't it? You at this time of year you get some results that on paper look shocking, but actually that's amazing, because it gives schools that wouldn't necessarily get the opportunity for the bragging rights. It gives them a bit of a chance to get one over one of the big boys. And actually, there's a couple of games. I mean, we won't get into them too much because it's previewed elsewhere, but there's one that jumps out. It's Whitgift against Ravenswood. Those two drew in the cup back in October. Yeah, sort of shock result in historical terms. Whitgift, one of the most dominant sides in schools rugby history. Ravenswood, who Saracens have been picking a number of their players. They've had an absolutely fantastic season, but historically, not necessarily that level of side. But got the draw at Whitgift. Unfortunately for them, Whitgift still went through because of the way the rules of the competition work. But there's going to be some spice on that, and with a few players missing, it could be interesting. So I'm looking forward to that one. But yeah, so the school season is back. There's some big fixtures coming up, including actually Millfield against Sir Thomas Riches on Wednesday, which is absolutely one of those ones that we were just talking about, where
banana skin material.
Don't have that many players that are going to be missing. Millfield obviously have loads. That'll be interesting. What is also coming up this weekend is the England under-20s. We sort of had a bit of breaking news in the middle of the last episode, where the England under-20s training squad was released, and they are in action this weekend against Cambridge University. Both sides, I suppose, using it as a bit of preparation. England under-20s using it as prep for the under-20s Six Nations, and Cambridge University using it as a bit of a stepping stone towards the varsity match, which you can actually watch live here on NextGen15 on let me find the date for you, Cambridge University against Oxford University, men's and women's double-header varsity match, Saturday the 8th of March. 12 o'clock kickoff for the women, 3 o'clock for the men, live here on NextGen15 from StoneX Stadium. So that's one to look forward to. Definitely do tune in for that. But looking at that England under-20 squad, we picked out a couple of names just as it was breaking last week, but we've had a little bit more time to sort of check it out and have a look. And there's some really interesting players in amongst that. I mean, they probably will add more players to this. I think that what this looks to me like is a squad that doesn't include anyone that's likely to be involved in the Gallagher Premiership, but obviously when that international window opens for the Six Nations, you will see your Kepu Tuipulotus and stuff becoming eligible for this squad, but nonetheless, an exciting squad. Um, One guy I wanted to actually just have a little look at or a little chat about is Reggie Hammock.
Yeah.
Harrow School, obviously some big names came out of Harrow last year in the form of Kepu and of Charlie Griffin. Reggie Hammock, though, no one really taking a sniff at him right the way through the school season. Stars in the schools cup final, and Saracens pick him up off the sort of coattails of the London South Central Academy, as was back then. And he's since been an absolute revelation. He's been awesome. Is it Bishop Stortford he's been at, I think?
Yeah, and he's actually appeared in the Prem Cup a couple of times. I think
Absolutely
he got a
amazing.
couple last minute call ups, and I think he scored in the Prem Cup off the bench. So he has been playing for Ampton as well, and in the Championship, and he got I think Player of the Match performance on his Championship debut, and he scored 2 tries in I think 4 games he's played for them. This is a back row we're talking about. And one of them was sort of a half pitch sort of run in. He's quick, he's dynamic, he's got a bit of sort of Kane James, Henry Pollock about him in that he's not sort of this big abrasive loose forward. He's sort of one of those slight sort of pound for pound superb sort of back rowers, and yeah, he's part of what, there's 27 uncapped under
Yeah,
20s
there's hardly
boys
anyone capped in
in
that
this.
squad.
So there's five capped, and only 22 out of the 32 were previously achieved under 18s men's caps. So there's 10 that haven't been capped for their country at all.
It's
Um,
incredible.
but
Absolutely
but
incredible.
but all of them are kind of, I was about to say household names, maybe in our household, but like names that we're fully aware of.
Yeah.
That there's sort of, which kind of shows the embarrassment of riches that England have at their disposal, and they'll come up against a Cambridge side this weekend who have obviously been struggling in the Championship, and they'll look to sort of prove a point there. And yeah, it'd be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in this site. I mean, the hammock story is amazing to me, and it ties in with what you were saying about guys not getting being 10 players in the squad without under 18 caps, where it's a real message to guys that are playing in the academy league currently, that are playing school rugby and maybe not even playing in the academy league. Reggie was not a week by week pick, partly because the South Central Academy last year were kind of spoilt for choice because they had Oscar Thomas as a hooker. They also had Kepu, who was sometimes playing number 8, so Reggie was sometimes on the bench. But
Yeah.
he's a guy who was, not looking at a pro contract really, who's suddenly looking like a really, really great prospect. And it says to everyone out there, you've all got a chance. If you're pulling on a shirt over the course of the next 3-4 months, every time you do it, give it everything, because if the right person's watching you at the right time, this can happen. It's an incredible story. One of a number, and we'll get into the backs in a minute. But one of the conversations that's been ongoing is the talk of the strength of the hooking department. And Alfie Longstaff, do you know who he reminds me of? When Alfie Barbary was coming through, there was another hooker who was just behind him, Sam Riley, who's
Yeah.
got about 50 appearances for Harlequins now and was excellent. But no one ever spoke about him because Alfie Barbary existed. Alfie Longstaff is that man.
Yes.
Kepu Tuipulotu has been the talk of the town, but Alfie Longstaff is outstanding. He's just not quite Kepu, but he's
No.
brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. He's a sort of he's an old fashioned kind of hooker, I suppose, in that he's gritty. He does his job. Set piece technician, but obviously with a few of the modern attributes. He can handle perfectly nicely and all the rest of it. But he's just a really good player.
I think he's one of 3 Yorkshire Academy prospects that are in this squad, which is
Yeah,
quite impressive. really impressive. Obviously, and all three are now sort of attached to Sale. So Tyremont, Alfie Longstaff, and Tom Burrow. Those,
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't done much research into that, so I may miss someone. I don't think I have.
No, I
Um,
think that's the ones. Yeah.
but those three, like sort of another moment to tip our hat to Yorkshire because
Yeah.
they've created all three of those players who have all came through right up until under 18. Obviously, all got selected by Sale last year, and have gone on to do great things. I think all three have already made appearances for Sale in the Prem Cup as well. So they'll be interested in sort of kicking on. I think Longstaff will be tapping on Kepu's shoulder, as will Jimmy Staples as well.
Yeah.
Again, these are not names to be sort of sniffed at because they're top quality players that, again, as we say, will not get their mentions necessarily, but will have a chance against Cambridge to really prove their worth.
Yeah. No, definitely. Two cap players in the forward group for the England under 20s group at the moment. Obviously, a couple may come in, but Kane James and
Yeah,
George Timmins both in the back row. George Timmins actually during the 2023 World Cup was one of those lads that came in and did a day with the England senior side. I'm sure people will have seen on social media guys coming in to do a day. Ben Redshaw came in; he was one of them. But George
Wolf
Timmins was
Blister went
another.
as well, didn't he? Yeah,
Yeah, he did, didn't he? Yeah, so Timmins obviously highly rated. Actually, another one though who came through really quite late, sort of the
yeah.
second half of his last year with Millfield, he suddenly started to really be quite dominant. And he's a
What
really
do you think?
old-fashioned back rower, isn't he? He's
Yeah,
like
he is.
all grit and determination.
Nails for breakfast kind of stuff. What do we feel as though could be a back row for this sort of game against Cambridge this Saturday? Because it is going to be without some sort of top under 20s back rows. It usually kind of picks itself, that under 20s back row, but
Yeah, it's an
they're not going
interesting
to be
one.
around.
I mean, looking at it, logic says you're surely going to give the cap guys a role, particularly as there's only two of them. So
Yeah,
their job is probably going to be to lead that team a little bit. So
yeah,
I'm probably expecting Timmins at 6, Kane James at 8, and then I'd probably go with Seb Kelly
Seb
at
Kelly,
open
yeah,
side with Reggie coming off the bench. That
yeah.
feels to me like the direction they'll go. But any combination of that would be perfectly acceptable, wouldn't it? And there's a couple of second row lads in there who can do a job, on the blind side as well. Josh Gilmore as well is a top player. He slot in on that blind side flank very nicely. But I think if I was going for it, particularly with the lack of experience, I'd go with starting Timmins and James, and then it's about who comes in alongside. And I think Seb Kelly, probably of the group, is the one that feels a bit of leadership as well from him.
Yeah.
Feels like the guy who probably I'd go with, but I don't know. What do you reckon?
No, I'd probably agree with Kelly. I do think Hammock should have a potentially a shout at it, only because he's played quite a lot of rugby in comparison to a lot of these players. Obviously, he's played regular Championship minutes and some Premiership Cup minutes as well. I think there also might be an opportunity, as you say, if you have. Depends on who they pick in that second row as well, because you've got some. I mean, two of the tallest second rows I've ever seen, and Aidan Ainsworth Cave and Tom Burrow. I mean, if they sort of any lineouts go wayward, you sort of be a bit surprised because there's those two.
Yeah, it's hard to
Don't
imagine
need jumpers.
that going wrong, isn't it? Yeah.
No. So maybe it is the case. Yeah, Josh Gilmore sort of slotting in as well. Look, I think it's going to be very interesting. There's also a gluttony of sort of selections in the front row. Potentially, you could see McEachran and Remont sort of as the two props only because, and Longstaff, Sale Sharks front row, like that could make sense. Obviously, Streeter, Staples of Quins as well.
There's a few combinations there, isn't there?
Tabuna Maka, I mean, sort of a hinge in your pack, sort of a big player to sort of bring on and destroy a few scrums. So look, it would be fascinating. Ethan Surrey as well, Sam Williams, two names that usually aren't in and around sort of England conversations.
Yeah,
Ollie Scholar potentially as well, like players that haven't been staples in England under 18s and England under 20 squad so far, getting their chances. Brilliant.
yeah. No, that forward pack is one to get excited about for sure. In the back line, I mean, my eye is drawn, and I'm sure yours is as well, to the sort of the darling of the school scene over the last couple of years, really, in Ollie Davis.
Yeah.
Play him where you want, sort of thing. Um, Play him at fly half, but play him anywhere
Yeah.
you want, really. I think was it 2 years ago? Well, 2023 Six Nations. He was playing at 13, wasn't he,
Yeah.
and having a lovely time out there. But 4 or 5 months later, he's slotting drop goals in the last play to win the St Joseph's Festival
Yeah.
for Kirkham Grammar School from fly half, and then unfortunately for him, and possibly for Sale Sharks as well, because I'm sure they were thinking that last year they had a team that could have gone very, very long in the Academy League. But unfortunately for Ollie, a nasty injury kind of curtailed his season for certainly the sort of Christmas period onwards. But back in a squad, and you've got to give him a run, haven't you? He's just sensational.
Yeah, I think it's a case of where, not if, because there's sort of Ben Cohen who also could put his hand up
He's
at
another.
fly
Do you know what?
half.
He's another amazing story as well. He's one of those lads you mentioned that didn't play England under 18s.
Mm,
Sort of was down at Blundell's. He was a good player. I think he was Blundell's skipper. Played Exeter Chiefs under 18s, but I don't think he was playing every week for them. Wasn't in the England under 18 setup, and then through the university system, really got his chances there. Exeter Chiefs were impressed with what they were seeing, started getting him more and more involved, and gets the call up from Mark Mapletoft to the under 20s. I mean, he's a real story, and obviously got his caps through the World Championships over the summer as well. What a sensational story!
exactly, and between him, Davis, and potentially you could put Bellamy at 10. I think those are the three options. And it's going to be really interesting how you kind of line it up, because I'd almost think about putting Davis again at 13, because having him and Ben Cohen on the team together could be really interesting. I think that back three is so tough to call. Jack
Yeah,
Bracken, Josh Bellamy, Charlie Griffin, Jack Kinder, George Pearson, Toby Wilson. I really where will Jez Twima play? I think he'll be potentially a centre. I know because he's been out at Provence.
well, so
Um,
and actually he's worth just lingering on for a second, largely because of the Provence thing, because we get a lot of questions that started around the time when Junior Kapoku had moved to Racing 92 and was getting involved in squads. Until senior level, there is no exceptional circumstances or anything like that.
yeah,
If you're eligible for England at under 20s level, i.e., you are English or have lived here long enough, you can play for the under
yeah,
20s. Doesn't matter where in the world you're playing. The rules only come into effect about you needing to play in England or there being some kind of extreme exceptional circumstance only happens at senior level. So Tuima are very much in that boat, much like Kapoku was before, which seems sensible to me. I mean, they're not going to be playing for the senior side for a good while yet. So why not go play your rugby, go get some experience, and if you're about to get a senior call up, that's the time where you need to come back.
100%. And I think he's had a couple sort of appearances for Provence, usually at 13. He's obviously playing Pro de Rugby, and like that Provence side has got the likes of Jimmy Gopperth, Tamana Harrison, Jules Plisson, players that no matter, obviously Gopperth, Plisson in and around his position, Tamana Harrison not so much, but players that know rugby really, really
Yeah,
well.
they know what they're doing.
And yeah, and something that Jez Twin can kind of sort of leech off. Obviously, had a season at Exeter last year. So look, he's kind of like that wild card where we can kind of understand where everyone else can sort of fit in in
Yeah.
that and sort of where they are in the pecking order. Just Tarima, we haven't been able to compare him against other players this year. He's obviously been playing a bit in the Pro D. We don't even know kind of how that compares to it's kind of in between the Championship and the Premiership
Yeah.
in terms of
You've got to
what
be
we're gunning
you've
at
got to
now.
be hard. That's what I know.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So that can be interesting. I mean, we could talk about this for days, but trying to pick a starting back line out of that England
Excuse me.
squad pretty
Oh,
difficult.
tough as anything. I like Dom Hanson at 9, although Johnny Wyman obviously is pretty spectacular as well.
Again, another late bloomer, Johnny Wyman.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, the stories everywhere. Jack Bracken, I was lucky enough to be down in South Africa when he was playing under 18s rugby for England. He was sensational down there. He's a brilliant player. You know, as you
He
say
seems
that.
like someone who's sort of kind of in the same sort of frame of mind that Henry Pollock did, in that rising to every challenge that sort
Mm,
of comes his way. So he rose to England under 18s and took that on. Um, he obviously has gone to Loughborough this year and uh, basically took the bull by the horns. Has got into the Bucks team straight away and is scoring tries for fun. I think he's one of the top try scorers in the Bucks Super League at the moment. He's a fresher. He's a first year. He then was called back to Saracens for the Prem Cup campaign and took that on. Did really, really well. Scored, I think, two off the bench against London Scottish. He then was shipped out to Ampthill over the last couple of weeks and scored there. So like he has been consistently sort of ramping up and up and up. Now,
yeah,
obviously, has got the chance, another chance with England under 20. He's already 5 caps under his belt. He surely features in that starting 15 again. I think we've also got so many players in these backs that are can play in so many different positions.
yeah. There's a lot of
Um,
flexibility, isn't there? I mean,
so
there's a guy I think I would use as my glue in a weird way. Is Nick Lilly, who
yeah,
he's not flashy, but he's a real sort of classic centre in that he loves his defence. He loves making big impacts. He loves doing the same in attack, but he can play ball as well, and he feels like a sort of a good kind of glue player to build a bit of a back line around. I think Charlie Griffin's probably a certainty as well.
yeah.
He's another
England
guy
Day,
as
obviously,
well,
training with
where
them.
the levels he puts, his game develops almost every time I watch him play. I remember watching him play for Harrow, and first time I saw him, he didn't really do a huge amount, but he was a big physical presence. Next time I saw him, he was suddenly one of the most influential players on the pitch. Didn't get a lot of the ball actually, but it was just you could just see the impact he was having. I saw him again, and suddenly he's added a layer to his game, and he's brought in a kicking game, particularly attacking kicks, chip and chase in behind. He was suddenly something he hadn't done at all. Now he was doing it loads, and then we've seen him get opportunities, Prem Cup and stuff, and looks kind of to the manner born. So he seems like one of these guys where every time a challenge is put to him, much like Bracken, he just goes, "Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I can add something to my game. I'll do that." Yeah, clearly a bright kid, and I think he's an interesting one to build a bit of a bit of a back three around, I suppose, because yeah, surely Bracken starts. Bellamy at full. I mean, he's got 10 caps at under 20s. He could finish off this season with something. What's the record for under 20s caps? 20 something probably.
I think Finn Cardiff went fairly far in
Yeah,
the
I
amount of
remember
caps that he
he was
had.
certainly well into the teens, wasn't he?
Yeah, that could be interesting. I mean, I think the more we do this podcast, Angus, the more breaking news we get right in the middle as we're trying to record. I've just seen, obviously, England have just announced that they're going to be playing, England under 20s are going to play Bath, but they're called Bath United, so basically Bath 18,
Yeah.
on Friday, the 17th of January. So 6 days after they play Cambridge. So again, in preparation for their first under 20s round one game against Ireland, which starts kind of unceremoniously on a Thursday, which is a bit weird.
A rare Thursday night kickoff.
Yeah, out in at Virgin Media Parks. So they will now sort of ramp up and play Bath. So that's now two teams that I imagine this squad will play, which gives
That Bath United side will be good as well because anytime they've played a couple of games, I think they've played this season already. Actually, I think,
I
and
think
they when
they played Ealing in pre-season.
yeah, and they use it to give first team guys a run out who've not had
Yeah,
game time. So there will be some serious pros out there. I think the last time they played, I think Josh Bayliss was coming back from injury, and they played him at 8.
yeah,
God, he's frightening these days. But there'll be some good players there. I also wonder if who the Bath players will play
yeah,
for. Will they play England or will they play Bath? Or will we
and
get a
there'll
few
be a
head to
lot.
heads?
Exactly, there'll be a lot of boys that you can imagine someone like Tyler Fire, for example,
Yeah.
who who will be kind of have a point to prove if he's playing for that Bath United side. You imagine he may very well do
Yeah,
that.
he's almost certainly going to play, and if he's fit, you'd surely think that's a nailed on game that he's playing in. Surely,
Yeah, and sort of an opportunity for potentially him to sort of stake his claim. There'll be a lot. I mean, that's one example I've just plucked off the top of my head, but there will be a lot of players that will want to stick their hand up and say, actually, Mark Mapletoft and Chisholm, you've got this wrong. I should be part of this England squad
yeah.
because Bath have got a sort of a load of sort of young stars that they'll
Well,
want
if Billy
to run up
Sellers
with.
fit by then, I'd imagine he'd
Yeah,
play. There's a few of those lads, and there's a few guys as well who, someone like Will Butt, who was one of the form players in the Premiership early on when Bath had a bit of a midfield injury crisis. But now that they've got Lawrence, Redpath, and Jomo all back fit, Will Butt probably needs a game.
yeah.
I don't much fancy facing him.
No, definitely not.
You
Again,
know,
with all these, that's the kind of thing you get with these A sides. It's a lot of boys with a point to prove, so they'll be really, really up for it. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be very, very
and
interesting.
you only have to look. I mean, not to get too deep into Gallagher Premiership, but look at the Bath back row. They've
Yeah,
got Miles Reed, they've got
Guy
Alfie
Pepper,
Barbary, Guy Pepper,
Josh
um,
Bayliss,
Josh Bayliss, Ted Hill, Sam
Quinn
Underhill,
Rue
Quinn Reid. Like they've got guys who
can move in. Yeah.
need game time. Josh Bayliss. They've got guys who need game time because you can't play all
No,
of
no
those
wonder they
guys
had
all
a
the
7-1
time.
split. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
They tried it.
it's the only way to give them enough minutes. So it's not going to be a bad Bath side that
No.
takes this lot on. In fact, you'd probably say that Bath are going to start as favourites because they're, yeah, I mean, A, experience and physicality comes into it, but B, there's some serious players going to be playing against. It's going to be
But
interesting on that.
you wonder who potentially could be released from their clubs to join them for that Bath game.
Mm,
And that might be why that game has been put in place, is that Cambridge will be the wider squad, e.g. the players that we've just been talking about, potentially that won't be sort of nailed on starters in the Six Nations. I wonder whether we'll have an introduction of those players who have been competing in the Gallagher Premiership. Obviously, it'll be Europe for the Gallagher Premiership teams at that time.
But also, if
So
we look at the way that Europe has been played this year, where teams have not necessarily always gone full bore,
yeah,
I wonder if Mapletoft's been on the phone to, as an example, Northampton, and just said, look, what sort of side are you picking for your European games? If you're not going full bore, well, perhaps even if you are going full bore, does that free up some of your young lads to come to us? Or equally for those young lads that are becoming part of the full bore side, do you,
yeah,
are you putting out a slightly weakened side? Can we have access to A and B? So I'm sure those conversations have been pretty open because they're going to want to. You don't want to be getting hammered by Bath United heading into the Six Nations. I mean, you'd love to get a win, but you at the very least want a good game and a good test.
indeed.
But it's an interesting time. Where do you? I mean, we'll get into this in more detail as we move towards the Six Nations. But what do you think this England side? I was going to say, what do you think they're targeting? They'll be targeting winning the competition. But what do you think is? Do you think that's realistic? Do you think they're favourites?
Yeah, I think so. I think the benefit of age grade rugby is you can kind of track progress through years quite accurately because usually the same
Yeah,
names
same
come
groups.
through each year. You can't sign a player to be sort of a certain age and sort of change your game on that sort of basis. So considering the success that the England U18s had a couple of years ago, you'd imagine that will translate here. I think they've got tough games away that kind of top and tail
Hmm.
their campaign. So they play Ireland away, and then they've
Yeah.
got 3 games, I say at home. England, France on the 7th of Feb at the Rec. You try to think the condition potentially that pitch will be in by the 7th of Feb.
There'll be a photographer parked in the dead ball area waiting for that classic sliding through
Batter
the
in,
mud at the
yeah,
bottom in at the wreck.
yeah. Then they go to Kingston Park to play Scotland.
That, do you know what?
After a bye week, that could be really exciting.
Scotland have really struggled against well most teams in the Six Nations of late, but I really like that fixture's at Kingston Park because
Yeah,
I think you'll get a decent crowd there. I know that Newcastle Falcons have been crying out for sort of England involvement up that way. So having an under 20s game is massive. I think you'll get a big English crowd, but also what with it being in decent distance of Scotland, you'll get a good Scotland crowd as well. It probably makes for one of the better England Scotland games at under 20s level that we've had for a very long time. Because unfortunately Scotland really have struggled at this age group for a little while.
and
Interested in
then
the Italy game.
yeah, Italy. Like, do you think Italy have hit their peak in terms of age grade? Do you think last year was their top year, or do you think they'll continue to improve?
I don't know is the answer. I mean, I've sort of said it every year for a little while. Is that Italy are looking decent at under 20s level. I suppose last year was the year that we started to see it translate to senior level as
Yeah,
some of those guys started to make their mark. I mean, probably they weren't as good in the Six Nations Festival as they have been. So maybe this is the high point. On the other hand, continuity counts for something. They probably they've got a smaller pool. Obviously, their team will look much more similar to their under 18 team than everyone else's does. I mean, I know we're saying that players don't change that much, but you look at this England squad and there's 10 guys in it that didn't play under 18s
yeah,
international rugby. There'll be very few in the Italy squad that don't translate directly across, and the ones that don't probably are guys from England, from potentially
yeah,
South Africa, who they've gone, do you know what, there's a bit of a project we can put on here. So they're not going to be guys who come in at the fringes of the squad. They're going to become guys that come in and lead the squad almost.
mm,
So I don't know. I mean, it's always Italy are always an interesting one, particularly at age group level. Yeah, it's almost become a bit of a cliche that Italy are better than everyone thinks.
yeah,
Maybe this is the year they're not quite as good as everyone thinks,
yeah,
but we'll wait and see. But certainly, again at the Rec should be a good one.
yeah. And then they round it off against Wales at Cardiff Arms Park. I mean, obviously Wales have kind of in a similar boat to Scotland, really, in that I think they've had good individuals coming through. I mean, some of them almost too good that Warren Catlin says actually you need to come start playing for us because we're in real
Yeah,
trouble.
exactly.
But like a few names but not enough really, are they? And
No.
you can imagine England will win that. So uh, I'm sure we'll do a deep dive into this under 26 nations and
Oh,
the
without
resulting
doubt.
under 18 Six Nations, because over the February, March, April period, those always sort of took your fancy. But I think these next 2 games, Cambridge, Bath, are almost as exciting as the Six Nations itself.
Oh, they really are. I mean, I think you know, you and I live for this, don't we? Seeing these
Yeah,
young guys get a run out. I think we've picked out a few names there, but honestly, we could do a few minutes on all of these players. There's some really cracking lads in there, and I really like the way that Mark Mapletoft is running the show there. There's a real what feels like a real healthy balance nowadays between sort of trying to achieve the ultimate end goal, of sport, which is to get over the line and get a victory, but also understanding that this is part of the pathway, and there is still a development aspect to it. In fact, there's a mantra, isn't there? I need to look this up. There's a mantra that they've got for all the sort of steps along the pathway. I think it's something like explore. I think under 18s is explore or something like that.
Yeah.
20s is
It's like
something.
explore, attack the space or something like that. Yeah, I remember Will
Yeah, and
Parkin
then
putting it in a press release.
senior rugby is performance.
Yeah.
Oh no, maybe it's that. Maybe it's explore, perform, win, or something like that.
Let
We'll
me
get
find it quickly before we.
we'll
Yeah.
get someone on it. But there's definitely a stepping stone, and there's a buzzword for each stepping stone, and
Yeah.
they're hitting the mark on their buzzword for the 20s at the
I mean,
moment.
I've just looked at a couple of Will Parkin quotes that came in the last press release of that under 18s camp in November. Overriding attacking principle was around pulling the trigger to execute space, focusing on going over, round, or through. So, I mean, I think there's buzzwords for days. The amount of mind maps and whiteboards that must be going on around those sort of spaces would be fascinating. But
Do you know what? On buzzwords in the England under 18s camp, I won't give away anything that they wouldn't want us to. But I was in their camp before Christmas, and one of the charts they were doing to do with some of their attacking play, and they were trying to make it fun and engaging so that they made it easy for guys to onboard the information. Anyway, one of the examples was KP and a picture of Kevin Peterson to sort of create the mental sort of link between whatever KP stood for and the image in your head. And to a man, not a single player in that England under 18s group knew who Kevin Peterson was. It was an absolute disaster. I've never felt so old in my life that Kevin Peterson is now some unknown has-been. I couldn't believe it.
No, exactly. Our times change. But I think final point on this under 20 side is there's not only been changing the squad, but changing the coaching staff. Dave Walder has joined as attack coach.
That's a really good appointment.
Campaign. Brilliant appointment. Obviously, England player, Falcons head coach. He's been with Bristol as their attack and skills coach recently, and if there are any sides that you want to replicate their attack and skill, it would be Bristol. So he'll be really interesting. They've got a new strength and conditioning coach, James Mealing, in as well. So sort of Mark Mapletoft is building actually. Obviously got Mapletoft, Titterell, Walder. I know Hayden Thomas has also been involved a lot as well.
Yeah. And with the A team coming in now as well, and them using the 20s coaches for the A team in large part. I know they had Lee Blackett in as well, but there's definitely from sort of reading the room on it, there's definitely a plan to start using the 20s as a coaching development tool as well through the A team towards Premiership and the senior side. There's definitely seems to be a plan to start to use it as a coaching pathway as much as a playing pathway, with key individuals obviously there that know their pathway rugby inside out. You Mapletoft as being the key man in that, but it definitely does seem to be an idea to bring through guys around that.
Conor O'Shea will continue to work in the background in his. I mean, I don't think even he knows what his job title is anymore. It's probably quite expansive
Sort
and
of
varied, and
the czar of rugby, something like that.
something like that. But I imagine he'll be the glue, won't he, that will continue to sort of shuffle these people along. I'd love to see Mark Mapletoft in a big role in the next couple of years, because I think he's
I wonder if he'd like it. We must ask him sometime.
Yeah.
He's obviously he's been in this game a long time.
Yeah.
And he went away from pathway rugby for a good while, and he's come back to it, and let's make no bones about it. There was a little period where England under 18, England under 20 rugby was not where it should be, given just the sheer number of players. And Mark Mapletoft's involvement has definitely seen a shift, without a shadow of a doubt. And I wonder if this is where the magic happens for him. I wonder if you know, I don't know. It's a
Yeah.
I suppose you never know until you try other things out. But he certainly sort of added something massive and changed the game in a big way.
He has. Yeah, that's our campaign for Mapletoft for head coach senior team, isn't it? We'll stick a. I'd love to stick my hat on that.
Well, there we go. We heard it here first.
I think that's an on that bombshell kind of note, isn't it?
2031 Rugby World Cup England led by Mark Mapletoft. Done. Quote unquote. Will Roberts. Done.
Yeah.
Right. Well, on that happy note, let's sign off before we start making any overly fanciful predictions. Come back and join us next week. We'll be looking back on round 2 in the Academy League and looking ahead to round 3. We'll be reflecting on a little bit of schools action as well and looking ahead to some of those early tournaments, including the Seaford 10s. We'll also be looking at the England under-20s game against Cambridge that we've been speaking about, and indeed ahead to that game against Bath United, where hopefully we'll have a bit of information on both squads. So an exciting one coming up. But thanks everyone for listening and watching today. Will, thanks for joining me again. Another very geeky debate, but hey, that's what we are.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you, Angus.
For more of this sort of geeky content, come and join us on @NextGen15, @NextGenXV across all platforms, and indeed the NextGen15 Clubhouse, where Will is going to be getting some awesome content going over the next few days. So do link up with us there. But as ever, do like, subscribe, and please send us in any questions and topics you want to talk about, because ultimately this is for you guys, and we want to hear what you want us to talk about. And indeed, we want to hear what you talk about, because ultimately your collective wisdom is much greater than ours. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.